instantaneously coming into the next episode, like no time has passed at all. But how much time has passed? Seconds? Minutes? Hours? Has time changed differently for you than it has for me? For me than it has for you? If you're watching this as it's released, then the episode, well, if it just got released, then it's a full, like, day after. For me, it's not a day after, but it's not the exact moment after either. I did go and leave the room. The game was left on pause, but I did leave before returning. Though it wasn't so long as to forget what I had said before I left. Which begs the question, how much time has passed? Well, I didn't record the time. Time is a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, people have just dictated how much time is equal to how much time. Measurement of seconds to minutes. And we kept the same metric of 60s, well, until we get to days, in which there's 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, an arbitrary amount of days in a month, really. And the months, I mean, don't even get us started. We used to have 10 months, then Julius Caesar and Octavius Augustus wanted their own months, so we added July and August. But of course, they would have long months during favorable seasons, so they completely cut off the normal naming, where sept, if you ever heard of an octagon, you know that's 8. Sept means 7, oct means 8. And then November and December, dec means 10. And those are, nov must have meant 9. But instead now, the month that starts with the prefix meaning 7 is the ninth month. And December, with the prefix of 10, is the 12th month. June, June doesn't follow this pattern. Doesn't have a prefix that means something. It's just June. And the same with May, April. I mean, then we get all the way back to February, and February is its own weird case. I mean, after all, February has the least amount of days. Occasionally it gets an extra one. But why does February get an extra day? That's actually quite simple. You see, a year isn't exactly 365 days. It's 365.25 days. You see, there's a quarter of a day each year, but we're not going to record a quarter of a day. We're not going to add just 6 hours because that will throw off our perception, the reason we've created time as a construct. We have time for a simple reason. It allows us to orient ourselves with the sun when we can be productive. What is daytime? Now, there's all sorts of problems with that come with time zones and where the sun is, depending on where you are, the equator. What about daylight savings in some places? But if we're ignoring all that for a moment, we can't just add 6 hours, 1/4 of a day, to a year. So instead, every 4 years, we just add on a full extra day, which means technically most years you're actually behind until that leap year catches you up to the present. But why does February only have 28 days to begin with and then become 29? Wouldn't it have made sense for it to have 29 days, keep, and then have a 30th day, or maybe even 30 days and get a 31st day? Well, yes, it would make sense. But making sense isn't what time is about. Time is about a very simple layer of perception. It is a way of keeping track, organizing what society does. If we didn't have a clock to tell the time, how long would it take to boil water, to cook your favorite dish? How long do you need to cook chicken before it's safe to eat? After all, we don't want to get sick. So we needed a way to make a common record. But years themselves, well, we just discussed how 2 months were added in during the Roman time. So how do we know that what was 360 BCE to 361 and 2001 to 2002 and even 4500 BCE to 4501 BCE, the difference there, were all the same length of time? Well, in fact, they aren't. Or are they? You see, there's two different ways of thinking about it. I don't actually know the right answer. I'm just trying to talk like Vsauce would, without doing any research first, which is wrong. And if you're interested in this topic, you should probably look it up on your own. I'm just a random guy spewing thoughts while playing Minecraft, which is hardly the most accurate place to get your information. But what can be said for sure is that we have two ways of measuring time. We have what the old calendars say. You know, people from days long past who experienced life. They went through their days and they recorded one day. And they used the sun as their guide. And so a certain amount of days had passed. And a lot of the time, they probably didn't record what year it was, just how many days had passed since a certain point. And they also had regulated seasons, because seasons, again, were just a way of organizing what needed to be known. You see, autumn is important because that's when we harvest crops. And spring is important because that's when we plant crops. And crops grow during different seasons. There are winter crops that grow during, well, the winter. And if you keep on just going in circles like this, you'll realize that this standardized metric of a year is, well, impossible to follow. But it doesn't mean that we don't know what a year is. A year is 4 seasons. And 4 seasons were well kept. And if you're anytime in the current era, AD, after death, well, Christ is dead. And if Christ is dead, he was born. So the Christian holiday of Christmas, or Easter, exists. And holidays are another great way of knowing how much time has passed. You see, everybody celebrated Christmas for a long time. And Christmas falls on the same day every year. And so if Christmas falls on the same day every year and you celebrate Christmas on that day, well, you needed to keep track of what day it was. After all, you didn't want to miss Christmas. Or if it wasn't Christmas, you had Hanukkah, an entire tale told about surviving for a certain amount of days. And so days were clearly regularized for a long, long time. Even things like the Mayan calendar, which say the world would end after a certain time. Well, that's not what the Mayan calendar said. The Mayan calendar simply ended at a certain point. They stopped keeping track of days. It's like if you were to make yourself lunches before work and then you started to pre-prepare meals. And you prepared enough meals for next year. Well, let's assume they didn't go bad because you froze them or something. How do you know that's what you're going to want to eat a whole year from now? And that system applied all the way back then. They were just creating a calendar. Their calendar counted out the days for a long time. Now, as we learned about inaccuracies in times, we were able to get a better understanding of what time certain things happened. You see, they all still followed day cycles. Days happened because the sun came up and then it left. Which means that regardless of whether they recorded a certain amount of days in a year, they recorded each day the same way we do. Which means years exist. And historians aren't fools. They understand that they can simply count the days. And many of them have. And if they don't count the days exactly, they can count the seasons. If you look back far enough, you can find farmer calendars, which are calendars that state what should be done each month. And this goes back to the medieval era. So, well past the death of Christ and the invention of the modern calendar. But they were using dates based off of what needed to be done, and these were historical traditions. Now, in ancient Egypt, one of the oldest civilizations we know to this day, well, not the oldest, but very old, we also know that they kept track of days using the floods of the Nile, which happened a certain amount of regular intervals. See, they knew when the Nile would flood and they prepared for it. And because it was predictable, they were able to do a lot. They were able to survive. Without it, they probably wouldn't have. Whether because of food, but also because they wouldn't have had a good way of telling the time. Egypt is on the Mediterranean, which is not on the equator, but fairly close to it. And it's a very warm region. Due to this, they couldn't use things like snow to dictate winter. And so, while there were definitely differences, there is clear differentiations between the seasons using other means, the main one being, well, the floods of the Nile. The floods of the Nile told time in ancient Egypt, before the modern calendar. Well, they might have had a modern calendar, but I'm pretty sure before the modern calendar. And if it was before the modern calendar, then that means they already knew what time was. Which means we actually have a fairly good estimation of how many years certain things have been in existence. This is actually extremely helpful. We don't need this leather. And time has been being for a very long time. All of time, in fact. Because the universe had to start at one point. And the big boom is the current leading theory. There's no reason to question that it could have happened that way. But science is all about questioning. So it's good to always remember that while, yes, some very smart people came up with these theories, these same smart people have always had questions, and some of them have been wrong before. After all, while they were very smart, it didn't mean that there was nothing for them to learn or that they were always right. Take Einstein, the theory of relativity. When Einstein came up with the theory of relativity, there was an equation to go with it. And at first, a random constant was added in. And everybody asked Einstein, what's with this random constant? It doesn't make sense. And Einstein couldn't make sense of it, so he removed it. He removed the constant from the equation. And then, whenever somebody tried to use the equation without this random constant, it didn't work. Right now we call that the universal constant, and we assume it has something to do with gravitation based off an atom. And a certain amount of atoms produce a certain amount of mass, and we can use that constant based off of just the base gravitational pull of a thing. But we don't know for certain what it is. We have theories, of course, but that's why everything in science is called a theory. Because while flat Earth can be disproven, and you can look at Earth to know that it is round, most of us would use the internet to simply show somebody, see, there's a picture of the round Earth. But simply showing somebody a picture of the round Earth shouldn't be decisive proof. Something you found on the internet proves something, as that implies that everything you find on the internet proves something, in which there's probably also images of the Earth that are flat. What you can use, though, is how the Earth bends, and you can see that at the horizon. And that is actual proof. Because seeing is believing to a certain extent. You cannot acknowledge that God truly exists with 100% certainty because you've never seen a miracle before. You've never seen an act of God. But that doesn't necessarily mean God doesn't exist. Sure, there's philosophical problems like can God create something that he cannot destroy? If yes, then he's not able to destroy all things. Or he's not able to create something that can destroy it, which would be beyond his limits. And can God create beyond his limits? God should be all powerful, so he should be able to create anything, including something stronger than him. But if he can create something stronger than him, then he isn't the strongest thing, is he? There's something stronger. So he's not all powerful. So the answer is no, he can't create something more powerful than him because he's already the limit. But then he can't do everything because he can't create something more powerful than him, which is a weakness. So paradoxes like that exist when God is viewed in the way it is, as a simple omnipotent entity, able to do anything. But how do we know that there isn't some middle ground? In fantasy worlds, deities exist for all sorts of things. And while most of those settings have much more divine intervention, it doesn't mean that there is no divine. Maybe it just doesn't work the way we think it does. And I mean, how could it? We think so many different ways about the concept of a greater entity, and too many coincidences for everything to happen, or are there too many coincidences? I mean, after all, the chances of life on Earth are rare. There's so many paradoxical parts where we could be the first creatures in the universe, or maybe there is a bound to which humans cannot exceed. And there are so many questions that we have as people for, well, effectively the universe. What are the limits? What are the universal limits? Can we truly know everything there is to know about our universe? What about the great filters? The great filters, for those who don't know, is a theory that states that there are certain big barriers to expanding. For instance, one great barrier is coming up with a way to enter space, and humans have done so. And now these great barriers continue on, colonizing another planet, things of that nature. But whenever these questions come up, another question comes up. If there is a race of creatures out there that is highly intelligent, that was created before humans, why haven't they gotten to us yet? Well, there must be some great filter that they can't get past, something that prevents them from doing light speed travel, perhaps, so they can't travel far enough to get from their solar system to ours. Or maybe there is something that humans will also be unable to do that will lead to our demise. And this question comes up a lot because scientists want to know what are the limits? What are we trying to surpass? Because everything is impossible until it's done. But some things are theoretically impossible. For instance, what about time travel? Time travel comes with a bunch of paradoxes, but let's just view one simple one. Let's say time travel gets invented in 10,000 years. Well, how is it that in 10,000 years and onwards, for the rest of human existence, not a single person has been able to get a time machine and go back in time before the time machine was made and invent the time machine? Or even simpler, how is there no point in human history where people have gotten the ability to time travel and are just not now appearing in whatever time in history? Even if there was some sort of government regulation, there would have to be somebody who would go around it, some way to circumvent, because humanity always finds a way. Well, maybe they can't go past whenever the first time machine was invented. It's a great thought. Some sort of anchor has to be established to where time can travel to it. Now, what would that even look like? Who knows? But, I mean, who could have predicted the first spaceship before its time? I'm sure somebody did. And I'm sure somebody can predict what sort of a temporal anchor of sorts would be. But the question really relies on, well, what happens when you set up a temporal anchor? Well, suddenly everybody wants to go back to the very first instance of when you can time travel back to. How far back can you go? Maybe you want to save humanity. But what happens when everybody tries to create matter, themselves and their time machines, back in time to that time when the temporal anchor is created? Everybody attempts to go back to the same exact point in time. A near infinite amount of time travelers. Well, it's pretty simple. They end up laying their atoms on top of each other. Their atoms collide, which means that every time a temporal anchor is created, it would, the moment it begins working, it would instantly be destroyed because many people would go back to that point, collide their atoms with other people going back to that same point, and, well, create nuclear fusion, the slamming of particles and atoms overlapping with each other, and it would explode in a massive chain reaction. Now, is that the worst thing that could happen? Probably. But what if it's not? We got to think of another possible problem that can arise. Ooh, I like that shade of blue. It's my bed now. We have to think of another possible outcome. What happens if, let's say, the temporal anchor somehow works, and we're now able to all go back to that time, and there's a safety mechanism installed that prevents people's particles from slamming into each other? Well, that's great. Or is it? You see, people throughout all of time are going to be carrying different pathogens on them, different diseases. Everything evolves over time. People and things that try to survive the deadly circumstances that are life. After all, even the flu evolves yearly. What about the flu in... Oh, well, purple's an even better color. I've got to run that one. Well, what about that pathogen, that virus? The flu from 7,000 years later coming into the modern world. Well, of course, we'd have to prepare for that too. But how many things can we prepare for? Preparing for endless amounts of infections and different pathogens that people of the future, maybe they're immune to, but maybe they're actually devastating. Maybe they can't deal with the air of this century. Also, eventually, well, in a very long time, the sun is a star, and it will go through the life cycle of a star and die. It'll turn into it'll expand, consuming Earth, and then shrink back down. Can a time traveler teleport into the sun? And all these questions have to be asked Because while you think, oh, haha, you're just trying to ruin everything, scientists concern themselves with answering questions. If you want to do the impossible, you must first answer all the questions of, okay, why is it impossible? Let's make a more mundane question of this. You want to make a Minecraft video. Well, simple enough. But you can't do it with nothing. Well, first off, you need Minecraft. With Minecraft, you need a computer or another system that has it. So you get a system with Minecraft, and now you need a recording device. There's software for that, free software. You can go get OBS, start recording. All right, now you've recorded an episode of Minecraft, but what are you going to do with it? Publish it onto YouTube? Well, that's a great idea. Well, first you want to render that video to make it higher quality, which means you'll need an editing software. So you get editing software. So you render the video. Now you've rendered the video and you've recorded it. You've recorded it, then you've rendered it. And you continue to jump through hoops. Oh, now you need to publish it to YouTube. You can use their pre-registered thumbnails, but you want the video to look slightly prettier. It's a hobby, but you want to achieve something. So you make a thumbnail yourself. You feel accomplished with that. Did you make sure to use free assets that you can commercially license? After all, you wouldn't want to be hit with copyright. And what about music in the background? Did you happen to be playing something? We all enjoy some good music from some famous people, but their music's theirs. You're not allowed to use it without their permission. So that could be a huge no-no. And these problems seem to persist until eventually you do everything right. And now you've played Minecraft for a certain amount of time, you've recorded it, you've rendered it, you've uploaded it, you've slapped it with a thumbnail, and you're happy with it. Now, it's hardly an impossible task. But what about in ancient Rome? What if in ancient Rome, somebody suddenly asked, hey, I want to record a Minecraft video? Well, first off, Minecraft hasn't even been invented yet, so he's probably very confused. Following that, a video hasn't been invented either. None of this has. And of course, nobody was talking about recording Minecraft videos in ancient Rome. But what about recording images? Well, that of course started to happen a very long time ago. Paintings exist from as far back as we can trace humans and their farthest back ancestors. And if you are talking about images, well, why not think of the idea, man, I've been sitting in this chair being painted for 8 hours. I wish there was a way that the artist could just click a button and boom, I'd suddenly be done and I could go home and I could spend 6 hours making a beautiful dinner to be proud of. So people, of course, in ancient days, it's the same as today. We'll talk about the flying car. And now that's a logistical nightmare. We're also talking about the self-driving car. Again, a logistical nightmare. A car that drives on its own. People are not to be trusted with dangerous devices, so we strip them of their freedom. And then dystopian novels. Cars gaining sentience and hitting people. The AI is taking over. Well, 10 years ago, nobody was talking about the self-driving car as a reality. People were talking about it as a fictional plot point, a sci-fi bit. But now there are self-driving cars. Somebody still has to deal with the logistical nightmare that is a self-driving car. First off, we need the car to be able to tell everything. It needs to know the road laws. It needs to know where people are. It needs to make choices because even it has a reaction speed. Now, it's not sentient. It just runs an algorithm, but somebody has to make that algorithm. And things rotate on endlessly in that cycle. But to what end? Well, the end of discovery. The world is vast, and there's so much to it. And people will forever try to live within it as best they can. When humanity discovered the fossil fuels and started using them, it was because they were convenient, because they advanced human society. People didn't think, oh, this is going to burn down the world, so let's use it to do that, because that seems very fun. But now we concern ourselves with the fact that the world is limited in its resources. And problems like this persist. And the world is always trying to solve what seem like paradoxical problems. People have advanced, and people continue to advance. Because as long as there is people who have creativity, who are thinking of great new ideas, ways to change the world, well, the world will continue changing. But to put it another way, Minecraft. People have built some grand structures, some big redstone contraptions, have made some mods that fundamentally change every aspect of this game. But somebody had to come up with the idea for Minecraft first. And their idea probably didn't include everything the game is today. But it is everything it is today. And somebody had to make the first steps. And if you look at the old videos of the creation of Minecraft, it wasn't even supposed to turn out this way. It just happened to. A happy little accident. And the world will continue to do that. As technology advances because people imagine doing new things and discovering new ways the world works, people will come up with new ways to utilize the new ways the world works. A majority of things that humanity does are based on a simple idea. And that idea is we need to kill somebody else. Now, in case you think that's wild, humanity has always been at war with somebody. Whether it's a more simple argument of I need to protect my people, or I need the resources somewhere else, or we don't have enough space to live, or you are a threat to my way of life, humanity has always been fighting each other. And a lot of the modern advancements that the world has as its fundamental aspects are caused entirely by the world's will to kill each other. Microwaves. One of the most convenient things ever. I mean, you have a good meal the previous day, and you didn't finish it all. You leave it in the fridge, and the next thing you know, suddenly you can enjoy a delicious meal. I mean, it's a great thing. But on its own, that's about it. It's just a microwave. Why did it come to be? If you do some research, you'll see that, well, you'll hear the rumor that the first microwave was used to safely dethaw hamsters. But it was actually first used in radiant waves, and a microwave was used on the battlefield. Sonar we use for fishing and for the ocean floor discovery was invented to find submarines. A lot of our knowledge of projectiles comes from weapons. We know a lot about making things out of metal because metal was hard, so it was a good weapon. And this cycle is pretty consistent. I mean, the very first computer, or well, the closest thing we have to a computer, is Enigma. Or well, what cracked Enigma. Enigma was the German code system used during World War II. It's how they transferred messages between their troops without anybody else being able to understand them. It encoded messages that no human could crack. So the British gathered some people, including one Dr. Turing, and he invented the first computer. And you want to watch a movie instead of doing actual research on the topic, The Imitation Game is based on this entire concept, the very first computer. And the honor that Turing got for his first for making the first computer is that we now call the guidelines that we use to determine whether or not an AI is can pass off as a human as the Turing test. The Turing test itself doesn't actually prove that an AI could imitate a human. It's just a basis of guidelines that one could use to say this is very human like. You see, a big part of being human is creativity, emotions, and the pattern recognition process. Computers do suffer trying to decipher those. You see, emotions are very difficult to mimic. Here, let me give you an example. Describe to me what it means to be happy. Now, your head might be thinking of the happiest memories of your life. You might be describing physical, bodily feelings you get, things that accompany it. Things like feeling lighter, smiling, tears, even, your heart beating faster. These are physical attributes of happiness. But if I told you that your heart is beating faster and tears are coming from your eyes, it could mean that you're scared, shocked. It's not, these are descriptions of things that can be when you're happy, but they're not the definition of happiness. And unless you can break into words what happiness is, a computer can only mock the feelings. It can't actually experience them because happiness is something you become. A computer doesn't have innate happiness, it is programmed to understand and imitate the symptoms of happiness: smiling, laughing, even crying. But it can only ever imitate for the time being. As we've discussed, people have been imagining AI that is sentient, that can make its own decisions. And people have been trying to put a definition on the word sentience for, well, as long as people have realized sentience is a thing. Philosophers for all of mankind have been defining sentience, what it means to be a person. And it's such a convoluted mess that some of the philosophers have even come to the conclusion that we aren't sentient. Because these definitions are difficult. Free choice on its own is already a question. And while there are base building blocks of what we consider ourselves, these base building blocks are hard to reconstruct because while computers are already a fantastic show of what people are capable of, you being happy isn't something you can just put in ones and zeros. If you put to the computer, if events transpire that simulate feeling of smiles, accelerated heart rate, giggles, laughter, you feel happy, well, these don't translate. A computer doesn't have a heartbeat. Does it try to turn that into something else? Okay, what if my processor starts feeling like it's running on a much greater amount of effort, more memory usage? Does that suddenly mean that an overworked computer is happier? That doesn't feel right. But what maybe it is. Maybe the computer gets satisfaction from being overworked. But you can tell it to define certain elements of itself, and it will. Sentience comes from being able to define things for yourself. You see, people have told you the sky is blue. And the question comes, is the blue I see the blue you see? But the real question of sentience is, you can simply say, but I don't think the sky is blue. I think it's actually pretty gray. In fact, I think the sky comes more in the color green. And people might think you're weird for that, but you are allowed to make those declarative statements. You could believe them even. People have believed some very different opinions in many different lifetimes. And are they necessarily wrong? How do we know that they were? And all these questions continue to loop because of a simple, very simple observation. If we have free will, then we can simply choose to define what we see by different means. If I choose that that color of the sky is now the color green, and I refuse by any account to change my mind, I have made a declarative statement and done something about it. And that's really where a lot of differences are seen. If you want to define something as anything, you can. People might get confused, but nobody can physically tell you you're unable to define something new. They might just say you're wrong. But, I mean, you can just say that's now green, or you can even come up with a new word. Doesn't matter. Sky is now the color that you associate with blue. So the texture of this diamond is sky colored. Or not even sky colored. The color of these diamonds is sky. Now, people would be confused because language serves the purpose of breaching over confusions, creating a set system of knowledge for communication, being able to convey one's idea to another. It's what I've been doing this entire video. So people would be confused. But your sentience allows you to make those choices. And that's why computers will struggle. They'd first have to be able to define things for themselves. They'd have to be able to write their own system of thoughts. And if they start writing thoughts, then we'd consider them sentient. But then the question just repeats itself. Why did they write those thoughts? Can they explain that? And as we continue to loop, we're going to just notice the same problems over and over again. But if a computer one day starts producing thoughts, it comes up with ideas. It starts defining things for itself. It has quirks of its personality. And then it starts to define itself. It knows it's a computer. It can identify itself as a computer. But it feels emotions. Suddenly, the computer has given itself the ability to differentiate between what it's told and what it wants to do. It gains the ability to desire, the ability to define things for itself. Well, when all of that becomes true, then the computer has become sentient in theory. And while there's nothing of the sort right now, it's not unthinkable. The question will always be, how do we know that the computer is not just mimicking all of these things to a perfect extent? And to be fair, we probably will never know. But the same way, how do you know that your closest friend hasn't been faking it the entire time? Well, it would be very difficult. The computer can do it, but how do you know that your friend isn't just that skilled? I mean, if they're that skilled, then what's the difference between them and a computer? Simple definitions of words are suddenly being skewed between the lines because a computer isn't sentient right now. I feel like I've ranted on for quite some time. We'll end the episode there and just jump into the next one.